People look at high-profile cases all the time, and we want answers on what happens and why they happen. So joining us is Bobby Tagavi, and you were a prosecutor in Orange County in California in some high-profile cases.
I was, Mike, and thanks for having me. I was a prosecutor for a little over 13 years in Orange County, California, handled a lot of sex abuse or sexual assault cases, and the Golden State Killer case. I was the prosecutor for the Orange County murders.
So people are very curious, the Idaho murders that happened, killing college students and these young people, and then a plea agreement being given.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
For the people that don't know the facts of that case, it was such a brutal murder, and yet they offered him a plea deal. What goes into the thought process of that happening, that they didn't take him to trial and get him the heaviest sentence they could?
That's a great question. So the plea deal ended up being 4 life sentences. And, you know, as a prosecutor, you have to make a decision on several aspects, right? The first thing you look at is, do I have the evidence to be able to not just prove in a death penalty case that the person did what I'm saying they did, but also, is a death penalty the right sentence? And in this particular case, I know that there was some mitigating circumstances that you know, he had some mental issues and some mental disorders and had some rough childhood trauma that a lot of times a jury will use to mitigate it. And even if they don't, you have to look at the next process, which is the appeal process. And the appeal process in a death penalty case always takes years and years and years. Most of the time ends up being a life sentence for the person anyways. So I think as a prosecutor, you have to kind of look and see, am I risking a true conviction by moving forward with the death penalty? And in this case, I know that it was really circumstantial in the way they tied it together, and there were some issues with the DNA, and the judge made some calls, the trial judge, that could have been appealed, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it would have necessarily been overturned, but there was always that risk. So I think they take those into account, and ultimately they have to take the family of the victims into account to decide what they should do.
Well, there's a case here where there's a death warrant that was just signed for an October execution for a convicted criminal that was convicted in '96. It's almost 30 years, so I understand the time frame. So what goes into, let's talk about the Diddy case, because he was such a celebrity. What went into that? Were there mistakes that were made? How was all of that done? And it seemed like very little results.
Yeah, that's actually also a great question. So with the Diddy case, where they try to bank, the U.S. attorneys try to bank, is on the RICO aspect of it, to try to say that it's an enterprise, that what Diddy was doing was this enterprise and this almost like a corporation, right? A corporation that's main business is to do these, you know, sex trafficking and prostitution and so forth.
And what I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No,
The prostitution across state lines, I don't understand that aspect. Is that part of the RICO law? So they were trying to get on that?
So the RICO law says if it's an enterprise and this enterprise is doing certain criminal acts. So the prostitution, the moving people over state lines for prostitution was part of those underlying crimes for the RICO. But it's, you know, the RICO was really designed for mafia and how to get the top guy as the CEO of the enterprise. And in the Diddy case, it was a very difficult road for them to have to climb to prove that it wasn't just these really perverted parties, but it was this criminal organization surrounded by that. And that's a heavy burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt for prosecutors.
And isn't it true, like with the OJ trial, I'm going way back, but isn't it true that the public sees so much all the time in the news, but the jury doesn't? The jury is intentionally isolated to just evidence. So what they're seeing isn't what we're seeing when they're basing their decision.
Yes, the courtroom is a sterile environment, and so the judge always has to make a decision on whether or not something is probative, and is it more probative than prejudicial, right? Because you don't want a lot of inflammatory things there that maybe aren't relevant, and it may be good for media and for us to see, and it's you know, exciting to look at as far as, you know, the case, but it's not pertinent to whether or not this person committed these crimes.
So lastly, the Epstein files, big political, obviously very political. Can you explain why they would not want to release grand jury testimony or grand jury paperwork on that? What's the reasoning behind that?
So in general, both in state and federal courts, grand juries are notoriously secret. The proceedings are secret. The witnesses are instructed and ordered not to talk about their testimony. And a lot of times in these transcripts, you have victims, you have other potential investigations that are going on with potential targets. So there's a lot that goes on in a grand jury transcript. And in a grand jury proceeding, there's no defense attorney. So it's only the prosecutor presenting things that, from their point of view, really, as to why they think that there should be an indictment. And based on that, there's a lot of stuff in there that could taint the public's view or cause safety for victims. And even now, I know that they just released, the DOJ just released all the Epstein files, or they're slowly releasing them to the Senate, to one of the Senate committees to review. But even then, they're still going to have to go to court and try to get it unsealed by the judge. So even if the Senate has it, they still won't be able to release it without a court's order.
So even in an overtly political case, probably better to err on the side of caution and not release information to the public that doesn't give a full picture.
Absolutely. I mean, there has to be a determination of the public interest in it, but there also has to be weighed against victim safety, ongoing investigations, and that's a fine line to walk for, and you should never do it for political purpose.
Appreciate the expertise.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Getting real answers on these things, not just the political spin that I'm guilty of sometimes like everybody else. We'll be back.